blessed Holy Tuesday to you. And we're going to be beginning our second day of the spiritual exercises. And our theme today is going to be setting the foundation of your spiritual journey. So that's our work today, right? And so basically the idea is to deepen in God's love for us, right? This knowledge that God loves us, that He's created us for His purposes, and that He wants us here. So kind of setting a very deep anchor in our hearts, with God being there to hold us steady in the midst of whatever difficulties that we might encounter. So I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction by recalling for all of us that we have to really, again, deepen in this and our understanding that God loves us as we are. Maybe an example would be, if we're an ant, God is not wanting us to be a lion. Or if we're an elephant, God is not asking us to be a waterfall, right? He doesn't create us to be something that we're not and end up putting one frustration after another in our path. That's not the case, right? So what we're trying to do in this meditation will be to see God's love for us, to experience that, to reflect on it, and to let it simply kind of penetrate into our hearts. That's the point here. So we are not doing an exercise in which we are kind of trying to get motivated to love God, where we're trying to kind of like get ourselves riled up to do something very particular. For example, if you're going to do a workout, you might want to put on, the theme song from Rocky or something, or some driving rock music from Led Zeppelin, or I don't know what, right, to kind of give us that initial push. Well, here we're not looking to do that at all. It's almost the opposite, right? We're looking to spend a little bit of time with God in quiet to really touch His love for us. And so before we begin, and before I suggest the gospel passage, I wanted to bring to mind a couple of quotes from Meditations and Devotions from actually the year 1848 from Cardinal John Henry Newman. And he has this observation, which is really kind of surprising, shocking in the way that he says it. He says that obviously we're all created for God's glory, but he says that each person has his place, kind of like that idea of the ant being the ant, the tiger being the tiger, and so forth. And he says that a person, even if he doesn't know what his mission is, he has his mission, and it's as sure for him as it is for an archangel. So he shouldn't be in any way worried about his task on earth, even if he doesn't know what it is, because God has given that to him, and no one can replace him in it. Not even the archangel can come down and do his work, right? And maybe that work is simply to extend kindness, to extend words of gratitude, to extend a little bit of motivation to people throughout his life. And he doesn't even know that, right? He's just there, a humble, simple worker, whatever he's doing in the Lord's vineyard. And yet God has put him there precisely for that reason, to do that work. Okay, so again, remember, the petition that we're asking God in this meditation, in this prayer, is to really deeply experience His care for me, His love for me, the fact that I'm wanted, that I'm needed in my place, even if literally I don't know exactly what that is. So really you could use any gospel passage that you like to do this, any gospel passage in which you tend to feel that God is speaking to you, that He loves you, that in a sense He's kind of putting His hands around you and holding you close. But since we're in Holy Week, I thought we could use John chapter 13, which is the beginning of the Book of Glory, which is the beginning, of course, in chapter 13 of the Last Supper Discourse. So let's just read a couple of those verses, and I'll begin a commentary. What I suggest is that from what I've said, if that occupies you for 10 minutes or so, fantastic, you don't need to go any further. But what if after a minute or two you're finished with it and you want more? Well, keep reading throughout the chapter. Keep reading through chapter 13, and as well trying to experience what the apostles experienced. You can do that in two ways. One, you could pretend that you are Peter, put yourself in the place of Peter, one of the other disciples, or you could also simply think of yourself as being there as the 13th apostle, listening, participating, hearing Jesus, right? So it's very important, I think, for this to help you get the results from it, or the fruit, to put a more kind of classical spiritual terminology, to employ your imagination, right? To employ the gift of your sight, right? To think, what does Jesus look like? What are the expression on His face? What are Peter and the others? What do they look like? What is their body language too? Hear their voices as well. Maybe try to kind of set the scene and see, what does the table look like? What is the food upon it? right? Because those things, I think, help us to kind of anchor our imagination. And then, of course, God works through our human faculties in order to bring about insights and, of course, ultimately a dialogue with the Lord himself, right? So let's just read these first couple of verses. Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from this world to the Father. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, to hand him over. So during supper, fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God, he rose from supper, took off his outer garments, took a towel, and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. So, what do we want to be thinking about here? Well, think about Jesus, who is aware of the fact that he is now going to the Father. What does that mean? He knows that it means I'm going to be scourged. I'm going to carry the cross. I'm going to fall under the weight of that cross. I'm going to have my hands nailed to that cross. I'm going to have my feet nailed there. I will be propped up, right? And then bang, my body jars as the cross hits its own foundation, right? All those millions probably of details that for him were very alive, right? And that's what he was thinking about. So we can imagine that there's this great interior suffering that he has as in his human nature. And yet at the same time, look at how he deals with us, we might say, right? With the disciples who very much represent us. He takes off his outer garment, right? Which is kind of symbolic too of him, his whole earthly life, right? He takes off, let's say, the mantle of his divinity, becomes a man and serves us, right? He ties the towel around his waist, as would have been the custom of the slaves at the time as they washed their master's feet. So this is what Jesus does for us, right? So as we read this, let's try to really, penetrate the depth of Jesus's heart, of what he does and also of what he says, knowing too that this is a gesture, right? A gesture which really comes to fulfillment as he dies on the cross. And of course, in a much more complete way, as he rises from the dead, and then what? And then draws us to himself more and more throughout our lives, ending in the ultimate embrace of heaven, right? So I think we want to have all these things kind of enriching us in our minds and our hearts so that we really are helped to experience the goodness of God, God's love for me, the fact that the foundation of my existence is the fact that God loves me, that God calls me here. So I invite you to reflect on that, to meditate on that for 10 minutes or so, 15 if you can manage. And then just kind of stay with that. And then for an action item, not that all prayer has to lead to action, but I think it's helpful during this week, especially now in quarantine, that we kind of think of something as well, concrete and practical. I would say do something that humiliates you, right? In imitation of the master who took off his outer garment, served us as a slave, washing our feet and drying them. Maybe it's taking out the garbage. Maybe it's cleaning the bathroom. I don't know, some small service that you can do that you don't have to do, but that serves other people. And above all, that reminds you, I am in my own little way trying to give life to what Jesus has done for me. So I think to do that as your action item, and then try to stay close to him, right? During this day, in your prayer, in everything that you're doing there at home or at the office. And then we'll tune in again tomorrow for day 3. Many blessings.